Influence is your superpower. The science of winning hearts, sparking change, and making good things happen. By Zoe Chance. Comprehensive summary. Introduction. Influence is Your Superpower by Zoe Chance presents a refreshing approach to influence and persuasion, reframing these skills not as manipulative tactics, but as essential capabilities for creating positive change in the world. Drawing on her experience as a Yale School of Management professor and behavioral scientist, Chance challenges traditional views of influence as something wielded by the powerful against the vulnerable, instead positioning it as a natural human ability that can be ethically developed and deployed. The book argues that influence, the capacity to affect others' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, is fundamentally about human connection rather than dominance or control. Chance contends that most people underutilize their natural influence abilities due to misconceptions about what influence is and how it works. By integrating research from behavioral economics, psychology, and neuroscience with practical applications and compelling stories, she provides a science-based framework for developing good influence, persuasion that respects autonomy, enhances relationships, and serves meaningful purposes. The book serves as both a theoretical reconceptualization of influence and a practical handbook for anyone seeking to become more effective in creating positive change in their personal relationships, professional environments, or broader communities. Overview of the book. Chance structures her work around what she calls the Influence Superpower Framework, a comprehensive approach to ethical persuasion that encompasses both internal mindsets and external techniques. The book begins by addressing psychological barriers to effective influence, including the reluctance to request that prevents many people from clearly asking for what they want. It then explores the biological foundations of influence, introducing the concept of the gator brain, Chance's accessible term for the automatic, intuitive decision-making system that governs much of human behavior. Building on this foundation, Chance examines specific influence strategies, including the power of warmth in building connection, techniques for effectively framing requests, and approaches for navigating resistance. Throughout these sections, she balances theoretical insights with practical applications, providing specific scripts, exercises, and implementation strategies for various influence contexts. The book addresses both personal and professional applications, from negotiating salary increases to mobilizing support for social causes. Chance concludes with guidance on developing long-term influence through reputation management and relationship building, emphasizing that sustainable influence requires consistent ethical practice rather than tactical manipulation. Throughout the work, she illustrates concepts with compelling stories ranging from historical examples to personal anecdotes, making complex behavioral science accessible and engaging for diverse readers. Key concepts in Influence is Your Superpower. Redefining influence, from manipulation to connection. Chance begins by challenging prevailing misconceptions about influence, arguing that genuine influence is not about manipulation, coercion, or dominance, but rather about human connection and mutual benefit. She distinguishes between destructive influence, which prioritizes personal gain at others' expense, neutral influence, which focuses on exchange, and good influence, which creates value for all parties and strengthens relationships. Chance argues that good influence requires three elements: respect for others' autonomy, genuine care for their well-being, and commitment to truthfulness. She addresses common concerns about the ethics of influence, acknowledging historical abuses while demonstrating how influence skills can be essential for positive change. Chance introduces the concept of influence blindness, the tendency to underestimate how much we are influenced by others and overestimate how much we influence them, and shows how this blindness creates both risks, vulnerability to manipulation, and missed opportunities, failure to exercise positive influence. She presents research demonstrating that most people actually underutilize their natural influence abilities due to false beliefs about how influence works and unwarranted fears about how influence attempts will be received. Throughout this reconceptualization, Chance emphasizes that developing influence skills is not about gaining power over others, but about becoming more effective at creating positive change while building stronger, more authentic connections. The reluctance to request. Overcoming fear of asking. Chance identifies what she calls the reluctance to request as one of the most significant barriers to effective influence. She presents research showing that people consistently underestimate others' willingness to comply with their requests, leading to unnecessary hesitation that prevents them from asking for what they want or need. This reluctance stems from several psychological factors: fear of rejection, concern about imposing on others, underestimation of others' desire to help, and overestimation of how awkward or difficult others will find it to decline requests. Chance provides specific techniques for overcoming this reluctance, including preparation strategies for important requests, scripts for framing asks effectively, and mental models for managing rejection without taking it personally. She emphasizes that making clear requests is not selfish, but rather creates opportunities for others to help, which research shows often increases their happiness and strengthens social bonds. Chance addresses gender and cultural dimensions of asking, noting how socialization affects comfort with direct requests and providing tailored strategies for different contexts. Throughout this discussion, she balances encouragement to ask more frequently and directly with guidance on asking respectfully and appropriately, emphasizing that effective requests consider others' autonomy and capacity rather than solely focusing on one's own desires. By addressing this fundamental psychological barrier to influence, Chance lays the groundwork for the more advanced influence strategies discussed in subsequent sections. Understanding the Gator Brain, the automatic decision-making system. Chance introduces the concept of the Gator Brain as an accessible metaphor for the automatic, intuitive decision-making system that governs much of human behavior. Drawing on dual process theories of cognition, popularized as System 1 and System 2 by Daniel Kahneman, she explains that most decisions are made quickly and automatically by this intuitive system rather than through careful deliberation. The Gator Brain prioritizes efficiency over accuracy, making snap judgments based on emotional reactions, simple heuristics, and pattern recognition. Chance argues that understanding this system is essential for effective influence, because most persuasion approaches mistakenly target the deliberative mind with logical arguments, while neglecting the automatic processes that actually drive decisions. She explores how the Gator Brain responds to different stimuli, gravitating toward pleasure and away from pain, preferring the familiar over the novel, and being highly sensitive to social cues, and provides specific techniques for working with these tendencies rather than against them. Chance addresses common misconceptions about rationality, demonstrating that emotions and intuitions are not barriers to good decisions, but rather essential components of effective decision-making when properly understood and managed. Throughout this discussion, she emphasizes that effective influence requires meeting people where they are, acknowledging the reality of how human minds actually work rather than how we might wish they worked, while still respecting their autonomy and intelligence. The magic question, tapping into autonomy and intrinsic motivation. Chance presents what she calls the magic question, what would it take, as a powerful tool for navigating seemingly intractable situations by shifting from positional demands to collaborative problem solving. This question works by simultaneously honoring the other person's autonomy, acknowledging their decision-making authority, while inviting them to engage their own intrinsic motivation and problem-solving capabilities. Chance provides specific variations of this question for different contexts. For negotiations, what would it take for you to agree to X? To behavior change, what would it take for you to feel comfortable trying X? To organizational transformation, what would it take for us to achieve X? She explains that this approach works through several psychological mechanisms. It reframes resistance from absolute, no, to conditional, not yet, invites the other person to identify their own barriers rather than having them imposed externally, and transforms the dynamic from persuasion to collaboration. Chance addresses potential concerns about manipulation, emphasizing that the magic question only works when asked with genuine curiosity and willingness to consider the other person's requirements, rather than as a tactical maneuver. She provides detailed case studies showing how this approach has resolved seemingly impossible deadlocks in contexts ranging from business negotiations to international diplomacy to personal relationships. Throughout this discussion, Chance emphasizes that the magic question's power comes from its alignment with fundamental human needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Needs that, when satisfied, naturally increase motivation and cooperation. The warmth competence framework, building trust and credibility. Chance explores the warmth competence framework, a model showing that humans evaluate others along two primary dimensions: warmth, perceived friendliness, trustworthiness, and good intentions, and competence, perceived ability, intelligence, and effectiveness. She presents research demonstrating that these two factors account for approximately 80% of our impressions of others, making them critical considerations for anyone seeking to influence. Chance challenges the common misconception that one must choose between being liked, warmth, and being respected, competence, showing instead how these dimensions can work together synergistically when properly balanced. She provides specific techniques for demonstrating warmth, including genuine curiosity, appropriate vulnerability, and active listening, that build connection without undermining perceived competence. Similarly, she offers strategies for establishing competence, such as selective expertise demonstration and credibility markers, that enhance respect without sacrificing warmth. Chance addresses how gender, cultural background, and professional context affect the warmth competence balance, providing tailored guidance for navigating these complexities. She emphasizes that warmth typically should precede competence in influence attempts, as people are more receptive to evidence of capability after they've established that they like and trust someone. Throughout this discussion, Chance emphasizes authenticity, arguing that performing warmth or competence inauthentically ultimately undermines influence efforts, while genuinely developing these qualities creates sustainable trust and credibility that enhance long-term influence effectiveness. Strategic framing, shaping how others perceive options. Chance demonstrates how strategic framing, the way options, information, or requests are presented, dramatically affect how they are perceived and evaluated. Drawing on prospect theory and behavioral economics research, she shows that identical options can elicit entirely different responses depending on how they are framed. Chance explores several specific framing techniques, including loss versus gain framing, highlighting what might be lost versus what might be gained, exception versus rule framing, positioning an option as special or as standard practice, and comparison framing, selecting reference points that make an option appear more or less attractive. She provides detailed guidance on selecting appropriate frames for different situations, emphasizing that effective framing is not about distorting reality, but rather about highlighting aspects of the truth that are most relevant and meaningful for the specific audience and context. Chance addresses ethical considerations, distinguishing between legitimate framing that emphasizes different perspectives on the same reality versus deceptive framing that intentionally misleads. She provides specific examples of how framing affects decisions in contexts ranging from healthcare choices to financial decisions to environmental behaviors, demonstrating its practical relevance across diverse influence situations. Throughout this discussion, Chance emphasizes that strategic framing is not about manipulating others, but rather about helping them see opportunities and options from perspectives they might not otherwise consider, ultimately empowering better decisions by expanding how situations are understood. Navigating resistance, from opposition to collaboration. Chance addresses the critical challenge of resistance in influence situations, providing frameworks for understanding why people resist influence and strategies for transforming opposition into collaboration. She distinguishes between different types of resistance, including reactance, resistance to perceived threats to autonomy, skepticism, doubts about claims or capabilities, inertia, preference for the status quo, and competing priorities, and provides tailored approaches for each. Chance challenges common counterproductive responses to resistance, such as pushing harder, becoming defensive, or giving up entirely, offering alternative strategies that work with psychological needs rather than against them. She introduces techniques such as acknowledgement and alignment, validating concerns before addressing them, inoculation, proactively addressing potential objections, and unblocking, identifying and removing specific barriers to action. Chance explores how cultural factors and power dynamics affect resistance patterns and response strategies, providing context-specific guidance for different situations. She emphasizes that effective responses to resistance require genuine curiosity about underlying concerns rather than assuming obstinacy or irrationality, an approach that transforms potential confrontations into opportunities for deeper understanding and creative problem-solving. Throughout this discussion, Chance reframes resistance not as an obstacle to influence, but as valuable feedback that, when properly understood and addressed, can lead to more sustainable and mutually beneficial outcomes than would have been possible without the initial opposition. The power of scarcity and psychological reactance. Chance examines the influence principle of scarcity, the tendency for people to value and desire things that are limited or potentially unavailable, and its relationship to psychological reactance, the automatic resistance triggered when people feel their freedom is threatened. She explores the evolutionary and psychological foundations of scarcity's power, showing how limited availability creates cognitive and emotional pressure that can dramatically increase perceived value and motivate action. Chance provides specific applications of scarcity across contexts, including limited quantity appeals, deadline-driven urgency, exclusive access, and unique attributes framing. She addresses the ethical dimensions of scarcity appeals, distinguishing between legitimate scarcity, communicating actual limitations, versus manufactured scarcity, creating artificial constraints to manipulate behavior. Chance demonstrates how scarcity can backfire when it triggers reactance, people's inherent resistance to feeling controlled or manipulated, and provides strategies for using scarcity ethically while preserving autonomy. She introduces techniques for leveraging the positive aspects of reactance by framing choices as assertions of freedom rather than compliance with influence attempts. Throughout this discussion, Chance balances practical effectiveness with ethical considerations, emphasizing that scarcity is most powerful and sustainable when based on genuine limitations rather than manipulative tactics, and when it respects rather than undermines the autonomy and agency of those being influenced. Charisma development, presence, power, and warmth. Chance demystifies charisma, the quality of personal magnetism that enhances influence, presenting it not as an innate trait, but as a learnable skill set comprised of specific behaviors and mindsets. She breaks charisma down into three components: presence, focused attention on the current interaction; power, projection of capability and confidence; and warmth, demonstration of genuine care and connection. For each component, Chance provides specific techniques for development, including mindfulness practices for enhancing presence, body language adjustments for projecting appropriate power, and empathic listening methods for demonstrating authentic warmth. She addresses common misconceptions about charisma, challenging the belief that it requires extroversion, physical attractiveness, or natural talent, and demonstrating instead how different charismatic styles can be effective across personality types and contexts. Chance explores how cultural backgrounds and gender expectations affect charisma expression and perception, providing tailored guidance for navigating these complexities. She emphasizes that effective charisma development focuses on removing blocks to authentic self-expression rather than adding artificial behaviors or mannerisms, an approach that creates sustainable personal magnetism rather than temporary performance. Throughout this discussion, Chance balances the practical benefits of charisma with ethical considerations, emphasizing that charisma amplifies influence, but does not determine whether that influence is positive or negative, a distinction that depends on the intentions and integrity of the person wielding it. Building long-term influence through reputation management. Chance addresses how sustainable influence requires strategic management of reputation, the collective perceptions others hold about one's character, capabilities, and reliability. She distinguishes between short-term tactical influence, focused on immediate outcomes, and long-term strategic influence, built on consistent behavior and relationship development over time. Chance presents research showing that reputation functions as a form of social currency that dramatically affects influence effectiveness, with strong positive reputations creating presumptive trust that enhances receptivity to influence attempts. She provides specific frameworks for intentionally developing key reputation elements, including competence, demonstrated through consistent performance and knowledge sharing, warmth, built through genuine care and supportive behaviors, and integrity, established through alignment between words and actions, even when costly. Chance addresses reputation recovery strategies for rebuilding trust after mistakes or misperceptions, emphasizing the importance of full acknowledgement, genuine remorse, and concrete behavior change rather than image management or defensive explanations. She explores how digital environments and social media have transformed reputation development, presenting both new challenges and new opportunities for strategic reputation building. Throughout this discussion, Chance emphasizes that effective reputation management is not about manufacturing a false image, but rather about ensuring that others' perceptions accurately reflect one's genuine values and capabilities. An approach that creates authentic alignment between internal character and external perception. Ethical boundaries. Influence versus manipulation. In the concluding sections, Chance directly addresses the ethical dimensions of influence, providing framework for distinguishing between ethical persuasion and manipulation. She defines manipulation as influence that either undermines autonomy, forcing or tricking rather than persuading, damages well-being, creating more harm than benefit, or distorts truth, relying on deception rather than honest communication. Chance argues that ethical influence requires three elements: respect for others' agency and right to choose, genuine concern for their welfare alongside one's own interests, and commitment to truthfulness even when inconvenient. She provides specific ethical tests for evaluating influence approaches, including the transparency test. Would you be comfortable having your complete influence strategy known to the target? The universality test. Would you want others using these same strategies on you or your loved ones? And the legacy test. Would you be proud to be remembered for how you influenced others? Chance addresses common ethical gray areas, including when withholding information might be justified, how to balance competing stakeholder interests, and navigating cultural differences in influence norms. She emphasizes that ethical boundaries are not merely moral considerations, but practical ones as well, as manipulative approaches typically generate short-term compliance at the cost of long-term resentment and damaged relationships. Throughout this discussion, Chance challenges the false dichotomy between effectiveness and ethics, demonstrating that the most powerful and sustainable influence comes from approaches that respect others' autonomy, prioritize mutual benefit, and maintain impeccable honesty. Conclusion. Influence is Your Superpower offers a refreshing and empowering approach to influence that balances effectiveness with ethics. By reframing influence as a natural human capability for creating positive change rather than a manipulative tool for gaining advantage, Chance provides a framework that readers can embrace without moral reservation. The book's integration of cutting-edge behavioral science research with practical, actionable techniques makes it valuable for anyone seeking to enhance their influence capabilities, from business professionals and leaders to parents, teachers, and social change advocates. Through concepts like the Gator Brain, the Magic Question, and the Warmth Competence Framework, Chance offers both conceptual understanding of how influence works and specific strategies for applying these insights in real-world situations. Perhaps most importantly, the book demonstrates that genuine influence stems not from clever tactics or psychological tricks, but from authentic connection, mutual respect, and shared purpose. An approach that creates not only more effective persuasion, but also stronger relationships and greater collective well-being. For readers seeking to make positive changes in their personal lives, professional environments, or broader communities, Influence is Your Superpower provides both the inspiration and practical tools needed to develop and deploy their natural influence abilities in service of meaningful goals.